Hello everyone, welcome back to another video of Code Pravah. I hope you all will be doing very good. So today we are going to make a quiz app in reactjs, which is a very good project for learning reactjs. So let's get started. So I will quickly move on to my VS Code where I have created one project with the name of quiz. And in the app.js, it's returning one h1 tag with the text of welcome to Code Pravah. So first thing first, I'll go to my src directory and I'll create one folder with the name of components. And inside this components directory, I'm going to create one component with the name of start. So let me quickly create this start screen and I'm going to import this start screen into my app component, and I'll remove this h1 tag and I'm going to render this start component. So let's work on this start component. I will quickly remove this div and I will create a div with the class name of start screen. Inside this div, I'll create one h1 tag and I'll put some text here. Let me write it like ready for a quiz. And after this h1 tag, I'm going to create one button and let's give this button a ID of start. So this is my start screen. Let's work on the styling part for the screen. So I'll be writing some global CSS here where I'll say padding and margin to be 0 and box sizing of border box. Then this is the right time to choose a font. So I'll choose some default font from my system and I'll be choosing this font and it's looking good for me with the perspective of a quiz. Then I'll go to my body tag and I'll fix the height to be 100 VH. And I want to change the background color for this quiz. So I'll be adding a background color of linear gradient of purple color. So as you can see, our background has been changed. Let's work on the start screen, which was the class into the start component. So I'll say I want position of type absolute, and from the top I want 0. Then I want width of 100% and of course the height of 100%. Then I want to use a display type of flex, and the flex direction I want is column. At the same time, I want a gap between my text and button of 1 rem. And I'll be using align item center and justify content center to bring my content into the center. Also, I want to change the color of this h1 tag. So I'll say start screen and the h1 tag, which is inside the start screen div, change the color to white. And let's work on this button part. So I'll say I don't want any kind of border or outline, and of course the cursor type of pointer. And for the start button, I want a font size, let's say 1.3 rem, and I want some padding, so I'll add padding here. And then I want to add some border radius to this button, and to give it a more realistic look, I'll add some box shadow to this button. So as you can see, our start screen has been ready. Let's work on the second component. So I'll create one more component here with the name of quiz, and I'll create a dummy component for now. And inside my app component, I want that whenever a user is clicking on the start button, I want to move on the screen of quiz. So I'll quickly import useState hook from React library, and I want to maintain 3 kind of stages. First stage will be for the start screen. Second stage will be when the quiz will be in progress, I will show the quiz screen. And the third one, when the quiz will be finished, I want to show some score. So let's say result screen. So I'll create one state with the name of quiz stage and of course a setter function. Now I want to define 3 kinds of stages for this quiz app. So instead of doing it here, I'll create one more directory inside this src directory with the name of constants. And inside this constants directory, I'll create one file with the name of constant.js. Here, I'll define 3 stages of quiz. The first is start, then in progress, and then ended. And I will export this quiz stages variable from this file. Now I will move over to my app component and I will import that quiz stages variable from the constants. And I will initialize this state with the start stage. Meanwhile, let's create one more component with the name of result, which will represent the third stage for this quiz app. And I will simply create this component as a dummy component for now. Now into app.js, I'll use conditional rendering and I'll say if the current stage for this quiz is start, then I want to display the start component. At the same time, if the stage is not start, it can be either in progress or ended. So in the case of in progress, I'm going to show the quiz component, and in case of other stages, I will simply show the result component. And I'll just cut both of these imports here and I will move them before the constant import. And if I go here and if I change my stage, this is the quiz screen. And if I change to ended, this is my result screen. So initially it will be start. So let's keep it start. Now I want to pass this setter function of quiz state to the start component. So I'll simply pass it using props. And then I'll move over to my start component where I'll be grabbing this prop and I'll import quiz stages into this component, and into the button element, which is start button, I will detect one click event. So whenever on click is happening, I'll use this setter function to set the quiz stage and I'll set it to in progress. So whenever I click on the start button, the quiz is moving to in progress state and therefore I'm able to see the quiz screen. So let's work on this quiz screen now. So I'll remove this div and I'll create one primary div with the class name of quiz wrapper. Inside this quiz wrapper, I'm going to create another div with the class name of header. Now, inside this header div, I want to show the current number of question which is going on. So I'll create one paragraph tag, and for now, let's write something like this, that one of 3 questions, which will provide the status to current user that on which question the user is currently. Then after this div, I'll create another div with the class name of quiz, and inside this div, I'll create one paragraph with the class name of question. And inside this paragraph, I'll be actually showing some question. For now, let's put some dummy question here like what is reactjs, and I'm getting it here. Then after this paragraph, I want to show 4 options. Now I don't want to repeat the options 4 times, so I'll again create one component with the name of option, and I'll quickly create one dummy option component here. Because these options will be clickable, so I'll remove this div from here and I'll create one button with the class name of option. And this option will receive a data, and the data will be same as option. So I'll be receiving the data here and I'll be rendering into the button tag. So I'll go back to my quiz screen and I'll simply import option here. And just below this paragraph tag, I want to render my option with the data as option 1. I'll simply copy this and paste it 3 more times. So I'm getting 4 options here. And just for bifurcation, I'll change it to 1, 2, 3, and 4, the 4 different options. Now, in order to switch to next question, whenever I'm done with this question, I'll create a next button. So I'll create one button here and I'll assign one ID of next and obviously the text of next. So I can see one button is rendering here. But this is not looking the way we want. So I'll go to my app.css and let's work on the CSS part for this. So the first class which is in quiz is quiz wrapper. So I'll copy it and I'll go back to my CSS. I'll paste it here and let's write some CSS for this quiz wrapper. So I'll say I want a background color of white and I want some padding. I don't want to occupy the whole width. That's why I'll say width of 80%. And for the larger screen, I'll constrain my width to max width of 37.5 rem. And then I'll assign some margin and I want position to be absolute. And I want my quiz to be appear into the very center of this box. At the same time, I want some border radius here. So I'll say border radius of let's say 0.6 rem. Then let's work on this header part. I want some margin and padding from bottom. And then I want a horizontal line which will bifurcate between the header and the body of this quiz. So I'll say border bottom 1 pixel of solid and some random light color. At the same time, I don't want this text to be that much bigger, and because this is inside a paragraph element, so I can simply say that font weight of lighter 300 of course, and I want to reduce the font size as well. So I'll say I want 0.9 rem of font and I want to make it italics. So I'll use font style property and then I'll say italic. So this is looking fine for me. So let's work on the next part, which is quiz followed by the question. So I'll select this question, which is inside this quiz div, and I want margin from bottom because I don't want it to be sticking into these options. So I'll say 1.25 rem of margin from bottom, and I want the font weight to be bolder. So I'll say 600 for now. And I want to align this text into the left side. So I'll say text alignment to be left. Now we have to work on this option part, which is having a class name of option. So I'll go back to my app.css and I have to work on this option part. So for the options, I'll set a font size of 0.9 rem and I want to utilize the whole width for each option. So I'll say width of 100%. And of course, I want some padding because they are looking so thin. So I'll use padding of 1 rem from each side. And because they are sticking into each other, so I'll assign a vertical margin of 0.3 rem. And the options are coming to center, so I'll use text align to left side. And because these are buttons, so I don't want any outline to be appearing whenever the click event is happening. And the background I want transparent. I don't want any background at all. But at the same time, in order to distinguish between different options, I obviously want a border. So I'll say border of 1 pixel, solid, and some random light color. One more thing I want to add, that is the border radius for these options. So I'll say border radius of 0.3 rem. Now let's work on this next button part. So I can select this button with the ID of next, which I have already given to this button. So I'll say I want a font size of 1 rem and I want a margin top of 1.5 rem. Because this button is sitting on the white background, so I'll say the background color for this button should be purple and the text color for this button should be white. At the same time, I'll add some padding to this button. Also, I'll add border radius of 0.3 rem. I want to put this next button into the right side, so I'll say float right. And for this button as well, I want some box shadow, so I'll be adding some box shadow to this button to give it a more realistic view. For now, we are good with CSS. Let's go back to quiz component and start adding some functionality to this. So for the list of questions, I have created one file with the name of question.js, which is inside this data folder. And this is having a list of 10 questions. You can add as much as you want. And you can see it is having a format like there is a question which will be displaying here, and then there are 4 options which will be obviously displayed here, and then there is a correct option out of these 4 which we will use to identify if the user has clicked on right option or not. So let's go back to our quiz component and let's import these questions. At the same time, I would like to import useState hook from the React library, and I'll create one state which will hold the index of current question. So I'll say current question and a setter function for this current question state, and it will start from 0th index. So now I can replace this one with the current question plus 1, which will give me the current question which is going on. And in order to get the length of all the questions, I can simply use questions.length property. So you can see I'm getting one of 10 questions because I have 10 questions in my questions file. Similarly, for this question, which I am displaying as static, I'll open a curly brackets here and I'll access the current question using the current question index. And that question is having a question there. And I'm getting this question from that questions file. And if you don't believe me, let me change the index to 1 and you can see also the question number has changed and the question has been changed. Let's set it back to 0. And in order to show the options, I'll simply remove these options and I can access the current question, which is having the list of options, and I can map on each option. And for each option, I will render this option component. And in order to pass the data, I'll pass option from here. So as you can see, it is rendering here. But in order to avoid that key warning, I'll add key property to this option component. And inside this key, I'll pass the option because all 4 are unique options. So let's work on this next button. I'll create one function here that is on next click. So whenever a click is happening on this next button, I want to move to next question. So I'll say set current question and I'll say current question plus 1. And let's bind this function with the event of on click on this button. So I'll say on click, simply call this function. So let's give it a try. If I click on the next button, you can see it is changing the question and I have reached up to the last question. But there is one problem we have not handled. What will happen if I click on this next button? It will go to the 11th question, but 11th question is not available into the array. So it will throw some error, which is of course we are getting. So what we have to do in those cases? So I'll add one check here that if current question has reached up to the questions dot length minus 1, it means we are at the last index of the questions array. Here I want to move to result screen. So let's move back to our app component where we have this setter function for this stage. So I need to pass this set quiz state as a property to this quiz component, which I can again go to my quiz component and grab that prop from here. At the same time, let's import the stages and I'll remove this comment and I'll say set quiz stage to quiz stages dot ended. So let's give it a try. If I click on the start button and clicking on next, and I'm at the 10th question, and if I click next, I am at the result screen. Now we have to work on checking if I'm clicking on the right option or not. So how can we do that? Let's create one more state which will hold the selected option. So I'll say selected option and a setter function to set this, and initially it will be null. Let me reduce this a little bit. Now it's visible. So initially it will be null. It means no option has been selected. So I'll pass three properties to this options now. The first property which I want to pass to this option component is correct option. So this correct option I can retrieve from the questions array and using the current question index, and then there's a property with the name of correct option. And at the same time, I'll pass two more properties, that is selected option and set selected option, to this option component. Let's work on this option component for now. I'm receiving three more properties except data here. So I'll say the first property is correct option, the second is selected option, and the third property is setter function for this selected option. So whenever I am clicking on this button, it means I am clicking on some option. So whenever I am clicking on some option, that option content should be added into this selected option state. So I can simply do that using on click event, and whenever this click is happening, I'll say set selected option, and inside this function I'll pass data to set the data as state. Now our selected option will be having the option which has been selected out of these four. Now on this option component, I will set some dynamic classes which will tell me if the user has selected right or wrong option. So in case of right, I'll say I want to add a correct class, and in case where the option is incorrect, I will add an incorrect class. So let's make it dynamic. I'll use backticks here, and this option, which is obviously we want, and I will add a dynamic class here. I'll say if selected option is present, it means if user has selected something. If user has not selected anything, I don't want to do anything at all. So I'll say if selected option is present, and if the data which is written onto the option is same as the correct option, in that case I want to add a correct class. It means this is the correct option. There can be again one possibility, if data is same as the selected option. It means the current option is not correct, but the user has clicked on it. It means he has clicked on some incorrect option. So in that case, I will append incorrect class to this. And for other case which are neither correct nor user has selected, I don't want to add any class. This logic can be a little bit of complicated, but if you do it by yourself, you will be able to understand it very easily. So as we have added these classes, let's write some CSS for these classes to visualize if it is working or not. So I'll go back to my CSS And for incorrect class, I'll say I want a background color of little bit of reddish type, and the text color I want a dark red. And of course, I would like to change the border color of darker red. And in case of correct option, I'll change the background color of little whiter and then color and border color to darker green. So let's give it a try. If I click on this database, which is a wrong option, that's why it is giving me red, because an incorrect class has been added here and the correct option was this one. That's why it is green, and we did not touch these two options and they are not correct also. So that's why it is as it is. Let's try the next question. So as you can see, it is automatically selected. This is because whenever I am coming into this next click function, I'm not resetting my selected option state. So I have to do it that set selected option as null again, because this is for the next question. So if I go to next, you can see, or let me just refresh it. And if I click on the incorrect option and I click on the next, you can see this is not pre-selected, and I can select the correct option now and it is green, nowhere red, because I did not do any mistake. And again, if I add some wrong option, it's working for me. The last part on which I want to work is scoring. So I'll go back to my app.jsx component and I'll create one state here with the name of score and a setter function for this score state, and initially it will be 0. And I'll pass the score and set score to my quiz component as a prop. So let's go back to quiz component and grab these props. Now we have to increase the score if the user has clicked on a right option. So how can we do that? Either we can pass these two props to option component where the actual click event is happening, and there it will be decided if the option was right or wrong. Or I have another idea. I can simply check whenever the user is moving to the next question. So I can write an if condition here. If selected option is same as, and I can access the current question using the current question index and the correct option. It means if the selected option is same as the correct option, it means the user has selected the right option, and in that case, I'll increment the score by 1. Let's go back to our app.js component, and because I have to show this score onto the last screen, so let's quickly move onto the last screen and I'll choose some right and some wrong options here. So I am onto my result screen. So let's go back to app.js component. And because I need to show the score here, so I'll pass this score as a score prop, and let's go to this result component. And we have to work on this component, which is receiving a score prop here. So I'm going to simply remove this div and I'll create a div with the class name of result screen. And inside this div, I'll create another div with the class name of score, and I'll add your score and I'll show score here. And then I want to add a button with the content of restart, by which a user can restart the quiz, and I'll add one ID of restart. So you can see the score is showing here. At the same time, I have to work on the restart feature. So I'll create one function with the name of on restart. And what I have to do? I have to set the stage. So I'll go back to my app.js component one more time, and I'll copy these two props and I'll pass this to result component as well. And let's go back to result, where I can receive set score and set quiz stage as prop. And here I'll set the quiz stage. That may import quiz stages, and then I'll say set quiz stage to quiz stage dot in progress, because whenever you click on the start, I don't want to go onto the start screen. In fact, I want to start the quiz itself. So I'll simply do it, and also I'll set the score to 0 because this is the restart. Let's bind this function on the click event of this button, and I'll say call the restart whenever on click event is happening here. And let's move over to CSS, and for the end screen, I want the same CSS as the start screen, and there is a restart button which is same as the start. So I'll add it here, same as start. So you can see it is working. And one last thing I want to do, I want to change the color and size of this score text. So I'll say dot score, and I'll say font size of 1.5 rem and the color I want white. So let's start the quiz, and you can see I am getting the quiz again. But there is one more problem. If I click on the right option, it is again allowing me to change the option, which is not a good idea at all. So what I can do, I can simply go to my option component and I can add one property that is disabled. So whenever there will be any data into this selected option, and how can I change this selected option into a boolean? I can add double negation here. So let's give it a try. If I click on the correct option, all the other options have been disabled. If I go to the next question and this time I select a wrong option, you can see this is incorrect, this is red, and this was correct, that's why it is green, and other two are disabled. And if I try to click on any other, it's not working at all. And if I simply click next, and my score is only 1, and again I can restart. So this is how it is working, and let's see how it is looking into a full view. So you can see it's looking nice. So what you can do into the next step, in the next step you can add a timer here, like if the user has not responded or not selected any option, let's say within 15 seconds, you have to automatically move to the next question. There is no any back button, so user will not be able to reattempt that question. At the other hand, what you can do, you can add more questions here, and currently we are showing the question into the same order. What you can do, you can randomize them using sort property for this array, as we did into the last video. So you can use that, and then you can have a bulk of questions, let's say 20 or 30 questions, and then you shuffle them and then you pick top 10 questions out of them. So in this way you will always show new questions to the user. And a good idea will be if you can add a progress bar here that will be increasing or let's say decreasing in terms of the timer. So these all kinds of things you can do it by yourself. And if you feel any trouble, or if you want me to create a second part for this, please do let me know into the comment section. I'll definitely work on that. So if you really like this video and if you have learned something new from this video, please give a like to this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to Code Pravah, and thanks for watching.